Picture this. You're sitting in 56 tons of the most feared weapon on Earth, the Tiger tank. Your 88mm gun can punch through anything the enemy throws at you. Your armor is so thick that enemy shells just bounce off. You're invincible, except for one problem. You can't move, because Mother Nature just turned your unstoppable killing machine into a giant metal coffin. And the enemy is closing in. Spring, 1943. The Eastern Front. Hitler's waiting for his new Tigers to arrive before launching the biggest offensive since Barbarossa. But while he's waiting, something's happening to the Russian landscape. Something the Germans should have seen coming. Something that's about to swallow entire battalions of their most advanced tanks. The Russians even have a name for it. Rasputitsa, the season without roads. And it's about to teach the Wehrmacht a lesson they'll never forget. Look, I know what you're thinking. How does mud stop a 60-ton tank? Well, stick around, because what happened to Hitler's Tigers in the spring of '43 is one of the most overlooked disasters of World War II. And if you want to see more stories like this, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell. Trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next. Because this isn't just about tanks getting stuck. This is about how geography became Germany's deadliest enemy. Let me take you back to February 1943. The Germans just pulled off an incredible comeback. Manstein's miracle and the coming storm. Stalingrad was a catastrophe. The entire Sixth Army gone. Wiped out. The Soviets were on a rampage, pushing west, and it looked like the whole southern front was about to collapse. On February 14th, the Red Army captured Kharkov, one of the biggest cities in Ukraine. The momentum was entirely with Stalin. German commanders were panicking, except for one guy, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein. Manstein was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He let the Soviets keep pushing, let them overextend, let them run their tanks dry of fuel and ammunition. And then he struck back. Fresh panzer divisions sliced into the Soviet flanks like a scalpel. 2 entire Soviet army groups got ripped apart. It was brilliant. By early March, the Germans had recaptured Kharkov. Manstein had pulled off what military historians still call one of the greatest comebacks of the war. The southern front was stabilized. Crisis averted. But here's where things get interesting. After Manstein's counteroffensive, the front line had this huge bulge in it. A salient, they called it, right around the city of Kursk. It stuck out like a sore thumb, just begging to be cut off. And Manstein knew it. He wanted to attack immediately, strike while the Soviets were still reeling, hit them hard and fast before they could dig in. March 10th, he presented his plan to Hitler, a rapid pincer movement that would trap hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. Hitler loved the idea. On March 13th, he signed Operation Order No. 5, authorizing the offensive against Kursk. But then Hitler did what Hitler always did. He started tinkering. See, Germany had these new wonder weapons coming off the assembly lines. The Panther tank, the Ferdinand tank destroyer, and Hitler's personal favorite, the Tiger, the PZK PFW-6, the Beast. The Tiger was like nothing else on the battlefield. 8.8 centimeter main gun that could kill any Allied tank from over a mile away. Armor 100 millimeters thick on the front. It was a monster. When Tigers showed up, Allied tankers just ran. One Tiger could hold off an entire company. Hitler was obsessed with them. He kept delaying the Kursk offensive, waiting for more Tigers to arrive at the front. Just a few more weeks, he'd say. Just a few more Tigers and we'll be unstoppable. But while Hitler was waiting, something was happening to the Russian steppe. The winter was ending. The frozen ground was thawing. And the Germans were about to remember a lesson they'd learned the hard way back in 1941. You know how Russia has 2 winters? There's the brutal cold that freezes everything solid. And then there's the thaw, the Rasputitsa. Literally translated, it means time without roads. But that's putting it mildly. What it really means is that the entire landscape turns into an ocean of mud. Not just regular mud. This is black clay soil that turns into something like liquid cement. The Germans called it martial mud. The Russians knew it was their secret weapon. March 1943. The spring thaw hit, and everything ground to a halt. Both sides. Operations everywhere bogged down into a standstill. The thick mud clung to everything. Tank tracks, truck tires, the hooves of horses, the boots of exhausted soldiers. Nothing could move. The battlefield became a frozen tableau. And Hitler's Tigers, those 56-ton monsters, they had a special problem. Their overlapping road wheels, the Schachtellaufwerk design, they were engineering marvels that distributed weight perfectly. But they had one fatal flaw. When mud got between those wheels, it packed in tight. And when it froze, those wheels locked solid. Immobilized. Dead weight. Now here's the thing about the Tiger that nobody tells you. It was rushed into production. Like seriously rushed. The first Tigers went into combat in September 1942, and they were basically prototypes. Crews got maybe a week of training before they were thrown into action. The tanks broke down constantly. Tracks snapped. Engines overheated. And inexperienced drivers kept getting them stuck in terrain they had no business being in. In January 43, the Red Army captured a fully functional Tiger when it got stuck in a marsh near Leningrad. Just handed it to them. That's how bad the teething problems were. So picture this. It's late March, early April 1943. The spring Rasputitsa is in full effect. The Germans have their fancy new Tigers arriving at the front. Manstein is desperate to attack. But everything's stuck. Supply trucks can't move. Artillery can't be repositioned. And those Tigers? They're sitting ducks. Some of them can barely move off the rail cars that brought them. Their narrow tracks, designed for speed and efficiency, are useless in this soup. Hitler's fatal delay, waiting for Tigers while Stalin builds a fortress. So Manstein's sitting there in April, watching his window of opportunity slam shut. He knows the Soviets are using this time to dig in. Every day Hitler delays is another day for Stalin to build defenses. And Stalin's not wasting a second. Soviet intelligence already knew the attack was coming. They had a spy named John Cairncross at Bletchley Park in England, feeding them raw decrypts of German communications. Stalin knew exactly where the Germans would hit, and he knew when. On March 27th, Stalin notified his commanders that the Germans would attack the Kursk salient. Some Soviet generals wanted to strike first, but Deputy Supreme Commander Georgy Zhukov had a different idea. Let them come. Let the Germans smash themselves against prepared defenses. Then counterattack with fresh reserves. It was brilliant. While Hitler was waiting for his Tigers, the Soviets were building the strongest defensive system in human history. They dug 8 defensive belts. 8. Each one filled with anti-tank ditches, minefields, bunkers, artillery positions. They laid over 1 million mines. The first belt alone was 6 miles deep. Soviet soldiers worked around the clock, digging trenches, stringing barbed wire, zeroing in artillery ranges. They studied the German playbook. They knew the Tigers would lead the attack, so they prepared specifically for them. And the whole time Hitler kept delaying. April, May, June. Finally, on July 2nd, he announced Operation Citadel would launch on July 5th. By that point, Manstein had been screaming for 4 months. His generals knew it was too late. Aerial reconnaissance showed them what they were up against. But Hitler was convinced his Tigers would make the difference. He had about 146 Tigers ready for Kursk. Surely that would be enough. Except here's what Hitler didn't account for. The spring Rasputitsa had done its damage. Those Tigers that got stuck in the mud? Some of them were still there in July. Recovery vehicles tried to pull them out, but the mud was too deep. One Tiger from the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion got so thoroughly stuck that it stayed there until November. Eventually, fearing it might be captured, the German commander ordered it destroyed with demolition charges. Can you imagine? Blowing up your own Tiger because you can't get it unstuck from the mud. The Tiger had this fundamental design flaw that nobody really talks about. Those overlapping road wheels I mentioned earlier. They were genius on paper, distributed weight evenly, provided a smooth ride, reduced ground pressure. But in practice, absolute nightmare. If one of those inner wheels lost its rubber tire, which happened constantly, you had to remove up to 9 other wheels just to replace it. And when mud or snow got packed between those wheels, especially during Rasputitsa, they'd freeze solid overnight. You'd wake up, and your 60-ton tank was a lawn ornament. German recovery crews tried everything. Blow torches to melt the ice. Hammers to chip away the frozen mud. Sometimes they'd light fires under the wheels. But that took hours. And you don't have hours when Soviet artillery is bracketing your position. Many Tigers had to be abandoned simply because they couldn't move. The crews would drain the fuel, pull the breech blocks from the guns, and walk away. The Soviets would find them later, study them, figure out their weaknesses. Now compare that to the Soviet T-34. The T-34 had wide tracks, simple, rugged suspension. It was designed for Russian conditions. It could handle Rasputitsa because Soviet engineers knew it was coming. They'd been dealing with it for centuries. The T-34 wasn't as heavily armored as the Tiger. Its gun wasn't as powerful, but it could move when the Tigers couldn't. And in war, mobility is survival. July 4th, 1943. Operation Citadel is about to begin. The Germans have assembled 900,000 men, 2,700 tanks, 2,000 aircraft. The largest concentration of firepower on the Eastern Front since Barbarossa. The Tigers are in position. Everything's ready. Except Soviet intelligence already knows the exact time of the attack. At 3 a.m. on July 5th, Soviet artillery opens up on German staging areas. They're bombarding the Germans before the German artillery even fires. That's how good their intelligence was. 12 hours later, the attack begins. 3 p.m., July 4th. In the south, where Manstein's forces are concentrated, the Tigers lead the charge. And at first, it works. The Tigers smash through the first Soviet defensive belt. Their 88mm guns are devastating. Soviet tanks explode before they even get in range. The Tigers seem invincible. German commanders start thinking maybe Hitler was right. Maybe the Tigers really are game changers. But then they hit the second defensive belt. And the third. And the fourth. The Soviets have anti-tank guns pre-sighted on every approach. They have mines everywhere. And they have something new. The Su-152 self-propelled gun. The Soviets called it Beast Killer because its massive gun could crack open even a Tiger. And there are hundreds of them. The Tiger meets ITS match Kursk and the grinding battle. So the Tigers are pushing north, trying to reach the town of Prokhorovka. And they're taking losses. Not catastrophic losses, but enough to hurt. A Tiger hits a mine and throws a track. It's stuck. Recovery vehicles can't get to it because of the artillery fire. The crew has to abandon it. Another Tiger's engine overheats. It was a common problem because the Tigers were so heavy and the engines were pushed to their limits. Dead in the water. Another one gets hit by an Su-152 and the whole turret blows off. The invincible tigers are bleeding. July 12, 1943. The village of Prokhorovka. This is where the legend was born. The largest tank battle in history, they said. 1,000 tanks dueling in the wheat fields. Tigers burning everywhere. Soviet tank waves crashing against German steel. Epic stuff. Except here's the truth. It wasn't quite like that. The Germans had about 121 tanks and assault guns in the area. The Soviets threw the 5th Guards Tank Army at them, over 600 tanks. It should have been a massacre. But the Soviets charged headlong into prepared German positions. The Tigers picked them off methodically. By the end of the day, the Germans had lost maybe 45 tanks. Many of those were recovered and repaired later. The Soviets lost somewhere between 300 and 600 tanks. Destroyed. It was a tactical German victory. But here's why it didn't matter. Hitler cancelled the offensive. On July 10th, the Allies landed in Sicily. Italy was about to fall. Hitler needed his elite SS Panzer divisions to defend the Mediterranean. On July 13th, he told his commanders Operation Citadel was over. Pull back. Manstein was furious. He thought he was on the verge of victory. But Hitler had other problems. And that was it. The last major German offensive on the Eastern Front was done. Now let's talk about the real casualties at Kursk. The Germans lost about 323 tanks destroyed during the entire operation. That's about 10% of what they committed. A fraction of the 12,000 tanks Germany built in 1943. Most German tanks that were damaged got recovered and repaired. The Soviets lost at least 1,600 tanks. Destroyed. Gone. A 5-to-1 ratio in Germany's favor. So if Germany won tactically, why did Kursk matter? Because the Tigers couldn't be everywhere. Because German tank production couldn't keep up with losses. Because the Soviets had reserves. Huge reserves. For every tank they lost, 3 more were rolling off Soviet assembly lines. Soviet factories were producing 2,000 tanks a month. Germany? About 100. The math didn't work. And here's the kicker about those Tigers. Only 6 Tigers were completely destroyed at Kursk. 6 out of 146 deployed. The rest that were lost? Mechanical breakdowns. Thrown tracks. Stuck in mud that never fully dried out even in summer. Immobilized by damage that would have been reparable in Germany but was irreparable in the field. The Tiger was an engineering masterpiece that required perfect conditions. And the Eastern Front was the opposite of perfect conditions. After Kursk, the Soviets went on the offensive. And they never stopped. The Germans fell back. And every time they fell back, they had to blow up more Tigers because they couldn't recover them. The Soviets recaptured Kharkov by August 23. By the end of 1943, the Germans were in full retreat across the entire southern front. The strategic initiative belonged to Stalin. Forever. Let's circle back to the mud. Because here's what's crazy. The Rasputitsa came back in October 1943. Autumn rains. Everything turned to swamp again. And once again, German tanks got bogged down while trying to retreat. Soviet tanks pursued them relentlessly. The Germans would establish a defensive line, but then the rains would come, and they couldn't maneuver. The Tigers that survived Kursk started getting abandoned on the roadside because recovery vehicles couldn't pull them through the mud. The same problem that delayed Operation Citadel in the spring was now accelerating German defeat in the fall. German field reports from autumn 1943 are full of complaints about the mud. Trucks sinking up to their axles. Half-tracks drowning in the muck. And Tigers, those magnificent beasts, sitting helpless as Soviet infantry with Molotov cocktails closed in. The overlapping wheels would get packed with mud again, freeze overnight, and by morning the tank was dead weight. Crews would try to rock the tank back and forth, burning precious fuel. Sometimes they'd dig for hours trying to create a path. But the mud just kept flowing back in. One Tiger commander wrote in his report that in good conditions on a road, the Tiger was magnificent, unstoppable. But off-road in Russian mud? He said you were better off with a T-34. That's coming from a German officer. The Tiger's narrow tracks, designed for efficiency, created too much ground pressure. The 56-ton weight would just push the tank deeper and deeper into the soft earth. Soviet tanks with their wide tracks could go places Tigers couldn't dream of reaching. Lessons written in mud. Why the Tigers failed and what it meant. So what's the moral of the story here? Because this isn't just about tanks getting stuck. This is about strategic blindness. Hitler became obsessed with technical superiority. He looked at the Tiger's armor, its gun, its intimidation factor, and he thought that would be enough. He delayed Operation Citadel for months, waiting for more Tigers, more Panthers, more wonder weapons. And every day he waited, the Soviets got stronger. Every day he waited, the spring mud did his enemy's work for him. Manstein understood this. Von Manstein wanted to attack in March when the Soviets were weak and disorganized. Attack fast, attack now before they can prepare. But Hitler wanted his Tigers. And the Tigers needed special rail cars to transport them because they were too heavy for most bridges. They needed special maintenance crews, special spare parts, special fuel consumption rates. They were magnificent weapons that demanded perfect logistics. And the Eastern Front had the worst logistics in military history. Think about this. The German army invaded Russia in June 1941. By the time they reached Moscow in December, they'd learned about Rasputitsa the hard way. It stopped them cold in October and November, turned the roads to rivers of mud, and helped save Moscow. That was 1941. Now it's 1943, and they're making the same mistake. They're not accounting for Russian weather. They're not designing equipment for Russian conditions. They're building tanks for Western European terrain and throwing them into the Russian steppe. The Soviets, meanwhile, learned from every defeat. After the disaster of 1941, they redesigned everything. The T-34 got improved. The KV series got phased out for being too heavy and unreliable. They developed the SU series of assault guns specifically to kill Tigers. They studied, captured German equipment and found the weaknesses. And they embraced Rasputitsa as a weapon. They knew when it was coming. They knew how to fight in it. They accepted that mud would slow them down too. But they planned for it. There's this moment that really captures the whole thing. July 13th, 1943. Rain starts falling on the Kursk battlefield. Not heavy rain, but enough to make the ground soft. German commanders immediately start worrying about supply trucks getting stuck. Soviet commanders barely flinch. They'd positioned supply dumps specifically anticipating bad weather. Their trucks had wider tires. Their logistics were built around the assumption that roads would be unreliable. The Germans built their logistics around the assumption that roads would exist. By the end of July 1943, Hitler's Tigers at Kursk were scattered across hundreds of miles of Russian countryside. Some destroyed in combat, most broken down, many abandoned, and quite a few still stuck in the mud from the spring thaw. The 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion, one of the elite Tiger units, reported that many of their losses had nothing to do with enemy action. Track failures, engine problems, immobilization in difficult terrain. One commander noted that more Tigers were lost to mechanical issues and getting stuck than to Soviet guns. Now here's the really crazy part. The Germans never fixed the problem. They kept building Tigers with those overlapping wheels. They kept building them too heavy for field repairs. They kept building them for conditions that didn't exist on the Eastern Front. By 1944, they were building the Tiger II, which was even heavier, 70 tons. Guess what happened? Same problems, but worse. Soviet tankers started calling them furniture because they didn't move. They just sat there burning fuel and breaking down. The Soviets went the opposite direction. They simplified everything. The T-34-85 was easier to maintain than the original T-34. The IS-2 heavy tank was designed from the start for Russian conditions. Wide tracks, simple suspension, reliable engine. It wasn't as sophisticated as the Tiger, but it worked. And in war, something that works beats something that's perfect on paper every single time. Here's what kills me about the whole Tiger story. German engineers knew about the mud problem. They had reports from the Eastern Front going back to 1941. They knew the overlapping wheels were vulnerable. But they didn't fix it because the design was too far along. Changing it would have delayed production. So they just kept building them the same way, knowing they'd get stuck, knowing crews would struggle, hoping that somehow the tactical advantages would outweigh the operational disadvantages. That's not engineering. That's wishful thinking. And Hitler kept demanding more Tigers. After Kursk failed, did he learn the lesson? No. He wanted bigger Tigers, heavier Tigers, Tigers with longer guns. He thought the answer to every problem was more firepower and more armor. Meanwhile, his panzer divisions were getting ground down because they couldn't move their most powerful weapons when they needed them most. The autumn 1943 retreat was chaos specifically because Tigers kept getting abandoned when they broke down or got stuck. Soviet forces would find them, strip them for intelligence, and use that information to design better weapons. By the end of 1943, the Tiger had this incredible kill ratio. Probably the best tank versus tank performance of the war. But it didn't matter. Germany was losing. The Eastern Front was collapsing. And those mighty Tigers, the ones that survived, were fighting an enemy they couldn't defeat. Geography, weather, mud. The Rasputitsa claimed more Tigers than any Soviet tank gun. And Hitler never understood why. That's the lesson of 1943. Technical superiority means nothing if you can't deploy it. Wonder weapons mean nothing if they can't move. The Tiger tank was proof that you can build the most feared weapon on Earth and still lose the war. Because in the end, the best tank is the one that shows up to the fight. And when the spring thaw hit Russia in 1943, Hitler's Tigers didn't show up. They sank into the killer mud, and they never came back up.